Good morning. I hate to, you said you didn't want to break up the worship team. I didn't want to break up the announcement team. That was amazing, with whatever I have to say. Hey, good morning. I'm a pastor at Calvary. I lead marriage and family ministry. So our babies through our college students, and then our anything from like dating to premarital to we want to make our marriage strong to we don't want to be married anymore. So all of that fun stuff. So that's kind of what I've been doing for the last 19 years at Calvary. My entire adult life I've been over there, and excited to be here with you. I was here a year ago, maybe 2 years ago also, just working with children's ministry. So it was really exciting to see that you guys are here and you're going and worshiping. The worship was awesome, and so I'm excited to be here. I believe God's put something on my heart that I get to share with you, and hopefully we're all in the place this morning that we can receive from the Lord. I am married to my wife, which is a good thing, Marilee. We've been married for the last 15 years. We have 3 children, and I say that we are like in the blissful time of parenting. We've made it through some of the storms. Our kids are 6, 9, and 11. We have a beautiful redhead who's just really fiery. Her first words to us, before Mama and Dada, was "I da boss," and so we knew what we were in for at that moment. Is like, oh Lord, what's going to happen? So that whole red hair thing, she came out. I've made fun of redheads most of my life, and then God said, "Here, you can have one," and love her. And so my family wanted to be here, but she has a 105-degree temperature, and so they're not here. I know, it's so sad. But we're at this wonderful spot where our kids can buckle themselves into the car. They know how to make breakfast and their own lunches. They know how to wipe themselves after they've gone to the bathroom. I mean, those are the beautiful moments in parenting. So for those of you in the back you're waiting, it will come one day, I promise you. And we only have this calm before the storm of the teenage years. So we're entering back into it, and we're scared. But I'm the family pastor, so I have all the answers, right? Yeah, not at all. So you got it. Here's where I want to go today is we are a week out from Resurrection Sunday. And it's not just Resurrection Sunday. Hopefully we live our lives in such a way that we lived out Resurrection Monday this week as well, and Resurrection Tuesday, and Resurrection Wednesday. He is still resurrected. He's alive. And what change does that bring about in our lives? And how do we live out our lives now in light of this new reality? I know you guys are starting a new series next week, and so I'm kind of here in the middle to kind of bridge us a little bit. But I want us to think through what did the disciples do, and how did things change for their context, and then what changes for us? Because I feel like this week is a little bit like last week was New Year's Eve, right? And we made all of our resolutions, right? I'm going to lose weight and stop eating so much and be kind to my neighbors, stop kicking the dog. And then last week was in the sense we're going to I want to live for Jesus. I want to live in light of the resurrection. And now we're 1 week out, and it's well, we just had a whole week in between where that maybe was not our reality. And there's a lot of disconnect. And so how did this change for the disciples, and what did this look like? And so my prayer for us is that we kind of step into that this morning and examine that. I want to just share a prayer that one of my kids, this would be my middle one, his name is Jed, Jedediah, and he's now 9, but he figured out very early on that if you want to delay bedtime, you just pray a little bit longer at night. So I'd pray, and he'd say, "Daddy, can I pray?" And he prayed, and he realized, there's that moment, and he's 3 years old, and he realizes the longer I pray, the longer I stay up. And for me, when I go to bed, once I start praying, I just fall asleep right away. That's kind of how it works sometimes, right? So I'm a morning devotion person, but Jed figured this out, and I want to just share, this is Jed's prayer at 3 years old, and he would just wax on eloquently, and it was beautiful. And so, Jed, you want to pray? And I just had my iPhone kind of underneath, and I was recording, and this is the prayer that came out, and I thought this may be a little bit appropriate for us a week after the resurrection. So can we hit this video and see what happens here? Pray?
No. Dear God, thank you for us today, and help Noah not to be sick again, and help his cough not to come. And help Satan to be in a fiery way, and everybody is bad. And please help Mommy and Daddy to sleep good tonight and tomorrow night. And I love you very much. And please may you protect us and get our mighty angels around us, and hope now have a really good day at school, and help him to have good friends, and help Daddy not to be sick, and Mommy, Taylor, and baby sister, and Carson, Noah, and me, and nobody test you our toys, and
Stalling.
and help Jesus not die on a cross, and help our Roman soldiers to be the fiery lake. And help you to love me so very much. And I love you very much. And you're my God, and I love you, and I don't want you to be in a fiery lake or a fiery furnace, or my daddy or mommy, or my baby sister, or Noah, or our house. In Jesus' name, amen.
That's good, right? We fixed some of the theology there because some of it's a little bit messed up, but you can tell, like, if you need to lengthen the prayer, you just start listing people out. Just go over and over and over again. So we've had to teach Jed, Jesus did die on the cross. Kind of needed to happen. He's alive. I don't know where the whole fiery furnace, maybe like, because we struggled a little bit more with this guy. He tested our patience, and maybe we said, if you do that one more time, we're going to send you to the fiery furnace. I don't know. Just kidding. I didn't say that. You guys are, what? This guy's a pastor? Yeah. Hey, if you have Bibles, whether it's on paper or on your phone or iPad, I want to hit a couple places today. I want to start with Luke 24. And what I'm concerned with today is that we have a great sense of what does it look like to live dependent on Jesus in any and every situation. In any and every situation. Because Jesus has some profound words for the disciples after he has resurrected, and he says, this is how I want you to live going forward. I want you to go to Luke chapter 24, and there's a quick story, and really this is just by way of introduction. I want to blaze through this and get to some other stuff. But Luke 24, there's this story that takes place, that there's these two guys on what is called the road to Emmaus. And it says this. This is Luke 24, verse 13. I'm in the NASB, but it says this. And behold, two of them were going that very day to a village named Emmaus, which was about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about all of these things which had taken place. What are all of these things? The death and the resurrection that was supposed to come, but they didn't know yet. While they were talking, discussing, Jesus himself, the resurrected Jesus, approached and began traveling with them, but their eyes were prevented from recognizing him. That's important. And he said, what are these words that you are exchanging with one another as you're walking? And they stood still, looking sad. One of them, named Cleopas, answered, and he said to him, are you the only one visiting Jerusalem, and you're unaware of these things which have happened here in these days? Everybody is talking about, like, seriously, did you just fall off the turnip truck? What happened? And he said to them, what things? And they said, the things about Jesus the Nazarene, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word in the sight of God and all the people, how the chief priests and our rulers delivered him to the sentence of death and crucified him. But we were hoping that it was he who was going to redeem Israel. He was going to overthrow Rome. We were going to make him king. And then he was killed.
Indeed, besides all this, it is the third day since these things happened. But also some women among us amazed us. When they were at the tomb early in the morning, they did not find his body. They came, saying that they'd seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of them who were with us went to the tomb and found it exactly as the women had said, but him they did not see. And he said, O foolish men and slow of heart to believe in all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary for the Christ to suffer these things and to enter into his glory? Then beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them the things concerning himself and all the scriptures. Imagine getting to sit with Jesus in that moment, and you get to hear like the Old Testament survey from Jesus. It's got to be kind of cool. And it says, they approached the village where they were going, and he acted as though he were going farther, but they urged him, said, stay with us, for it is getting toward evening, and the day is now nearly over. So he went in to stay with them, and he reclined at the table with them, and he took the bread, and he blessed it. And breaking it, he began giving it to them. And here's the cool part. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. And they said to one another, were not our hearts burning within us while he was speaking to us on the road, while he was explaining the scriptures to us? They got up that very hour. They returned to Jerusalem and found gathered the 11 and those who were with them, saying, the Lord has really risen and appeared to Simon. They began to relate their experience on the road and how he was recognized by them in the breaking of the bread. It's amazing, this moment where Jesus says, he takes the bread, and it says he broke it and he blessed it. That blessing in Hebrew is Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. There's this word in there, it's lechem. Lechem means bread. And he said this prayer and he blessed it. If you go back to Matthew 26, he's sitting there at the Last Supper, which is a Passover Seder meal. And he says, this bread, this represents my body. When you see one of those thin crackers, not the Hawaiian bread, but the thin crackers, we call it matzah, he says, this is my body. And it reminds him of it because it was without leaven. It was flat. Leaven in scriptures is symbolic of sin. It also has holes in it, and he was pierced. And it also was striped because of the cooking process. And it says in Isaiah 53 that he was striped, he was pierced. By his wounds we are healed. But he takes that bread, that lechem, and it's amazing because the translation for that is, blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who brings forth bread from the earth. Do you know, I'm Jewish, and so my Jewish people have been saying that prayer for the last couple of thousands of years. And when they say that without the knowledge of God bringing forth bread from the earth. Jesus calls himself in John 6, he says, I am the bread of life. Jesus was born in a place called Bethlehem, in Hebrew, Beit Lechem, meaning the house of bread. And so you have this amazing picture of Jesus in that moment with those two on their road to Emmaus. He breaks the bread. He says, look, I've risen. The bread has risen up from the earth. And it says their eyes were opened. And that has to get us all the way back, and you can check this out later, but Genesis 3, do you know what happens? In the fall, in Genesis 3, I think it's verse 7, Adam and Eve, they take the fruit that they weren't supposed to eat, and it says that their eyes were opened. And what Jesus is doing and what Luke is masterfully doing right here is he's connecting these two stories. That what was broken in the garden has now been restored after the resurrection. And so their response was they go out and they tell others about it. Now, I want to move from here to Matthew 28. And in Matthew 28, we know this passage after Jesus had risen and they go to the tomb and Mary is there and he's not there. We have angels. Don't be afraid. I know that you're looking for Jesus who's been crucified. He's not here, for he is risen, just as he said. So they check out this place and they looked at the tomb quickly. Now, it says this. In verse 8, Matthew 28, verse 8, they left the tomb quickly with fear and great joy. We have two emotions like, did this really happen? And oh my gosh, did it really happen? And they ran and they reported to the disciples, and behold, Jesus met them and he greeted them. And they came up and they took hold of his feet and worshiped him. Some of you have the ESV, And instead of it saying, and he greeted them, it basically says that Jesus went up to them and he said, greetings. Kind of like, ta-da, right? Like, did it, made it, I'm here. They greet him, and he greets them. And Jesus says, don't be afraid. Why would they be afraid? He overcame death. Go and take word to my brethren to leave for Galilee, and there they will see me. Now I want to jump to verse 16. The 11 disciples, they went to Galilee, to the mountain which Jesus had designated. And when they saw him, they worshiped him, but some were still doubtful. And Jesus came up, and he spoke to them, saying, and this is important, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Remember that. And now he gives them marching orders. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I command you. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Let me just give away the ending for this morning. That statement right there that we call the Great Commission is bookended by a couple of really profound and amazing things that Jesus is saying. Number one, in the very beginning, he says, all authority has been given to me. I've been given all authority. And on the end, he says, my presence, I am with you always, even to the very end of the age. What he's trying to set them up for in this moment is he's trying to say, it doesn't matter what you have going before you, that you've been given my authority, my power, and then you've also been given my presence, that I'll be with you. It doesn't matter what I say in between. Whatever life circumstance you get hit with, I want you to live a life that is dependent on me. And so he says, go back to Jerusalem. I know it was just 3 days ago, and you disciples, you were running away because you were so scared of the Roman soldiers. I want you to go back to that place in the power of my authority, and I want you to now go tell these people, the people who killed me, and you were on the hot seat as well, go back and tell them about me and proclaim. That word proclaim is like using a megaphone to publish, to get the word out there. And so that's Jesus' call. They have to remember this lesson because we got to go back to one other place. I want you to go to Matthew 14. And in Matthew 14, there's a miracle that takes place. And Jesus is trying to communicate the same lesson. And you see repetitive over and over again. Jesus is trying to get these messages out to the disciples, and they're a little bit thick-skulled, and so it takes them a few times. But this lesson of living a life dependent on God shows up many times. And this is what happens. This is Matthew 14, verses 22 going forward. It says this, immediately he made the disciples get in the boat and go ahead of him to the other side. And while he sent the crowds away, and after he'd sent the crowds away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray when it was evening. And he was there alone. But the boat was already a long distance from the land, battered by the waves, for the wind was contrary. The wind was coming against them. And in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified. And they said, it is a ghost. And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, take courage, it is I, do not be afraid. And then Peter, the only time that he really opens his mouth is to change feet, right? He's always talking. Lord, if it's you, command me to come to you on the water. And he said, come. Peter got out of the boat. He walked on the water, and he came toward Jesus. But seeing the wind, he became frightened. And beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. Immediately, Jesus stretched out his hand, took a hold of him, and said, you have little faith, why did you doubt? And when they got in the boat, the wind stopped. And those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, you are certainly God's son. When they had crossed over, they came to the land of Gennesaret. Now, there's a couple of things I think are incredibly interesting here. This is not the first time that the disciples have been in a boat and there's a storm. There's another time that happened in Matthew chapter 8 where Jesus is asleep and they wake him up. Don't you care that we're dying? Don't you care that we're perishing? And he says, shalom, peace, be still. And he shows his power over nature. And in fact, Mark records it, that they were afraid. It says that the boat was filling up with water. All four Gospels, they account for this story that takes place. And it says that they were afraid. And then once Jesus shows his power over nature, it says, then they were filled with great fear. They went from fear to great fear. They had the storm, and they were afraid. And then they had no storm, and then they were even more afraid because they realized something in that moment. They realized the deity of Jesus. They realized that Jesus was actually God, that this was the God who, in the Old Testament, had the power over nature. Now, Jews don't really have a great relationship with water. You go back to it, like every time we come to a body of water, we ask it to like part so we could walk on dry land, right? I went surfing, which sounds kind of cool at first, but I don't surf. Like I went surfing on Friday with Eric Wakeling and Tim Nellis and Doug Brown, and those guys are way better. I could not even like get out like past the first. I was like me and the kids doing sandcastles. That's where we were at, right? Like I had to squeeze into like wetsuit, right? I'm like, I need some butter. This thing's not going to get on. Like we got to make it a little more slick. But the ocean, the sea, is always in the Bible is always like this metaphor of chaos. It's scary. I don't like going. There's creatures in there that want to eat me, and I don't want to go in there. And so the disciples are there, and they are fearing for their lives. And they call out. And Jesus is saying, I want you to live dependently on me even in the storm, in any and every situation. And when it stops, they worship him. Now, a couple of things that are kind of interesting about this passage, if you kind of look around and you kind of piece together all of the gospel narratives, I don't know like distance and time that you've ever thought about, but I as I've studied this, and I was actually on this water in a boat just a couple months ago in Israel. They were out, and it says in John that they were out about 3 to 4 miles. They had gone out, and the duration is the thing that kind of gets me all tripped up, because I think like, oh, a little storm comes up, and they're fighting for a good half hour, 45 minutes. But in the book of John, he says when evening had come, it finally had gotten dark. And the Romans, they split up time into the first, second, third, fourth watch. So when they actually got into the boat, it was the first watch. It was somewhere between 6 and 9 p.m. By the time they actually have Jesus come out, it's between 3 and 6 a.m. They've been out there for somewhere around 9 hours in this storm. For me, I just kind of thought like, oh, it's just this little span of time, and they just have to, muster up their energy for a good half hour. But we have waves crashing in the boat. The wind is coming against them, and this is something that still happens today in Galilee. And so Jesus comes there, and he is with them in the storm, and he says, I will be with you. In that moment, he is showing two things. I have authority and power, not only in heaven, but here on earth. I could take this storm, and I can say, shalom, rebuke the storm, muzzle it is literally what it means. He can muzzle the storm, and then he says, I'm going to be with you in this. This is the message that Jesus has been trying to tell the disciples all the way through. And Jesus could have done this in any way that he wanted. Not that we have dolphins in this little lake, but he could have mustered up a couple dolphins and rode them in, right? Say, here I am. But what I love about Jesus and what he does is he knows our fear. He knows our tendency to be in the storm and to just be freaked out. And he puts his sandals in the place where our fear resides. There's this crazy passage, when the Israelites, they come out of Egypt and they're thinking, we have freedom, this is a great thing, let's get out of Egypt. But in Psalm 77, it kind of recounts this story of what actually happened. Listen to this account of the Exodus coming out, where the Red Sea splits. Just the supernatural God at work here. This is Psalm 77, verse 16. You can just listen, but it says this. When the waters saw you, O God, the waters saw you, they were in anguish. It's kind of weird to think about this, kind of personifying, giving feeling to nature and creation. When the waters saw you, they were in anguish. The deeps also trembled. The clouds poured out water. The skies gave forth a sound. Your arrows flashed here and there. The sound of your thunder was in the whirlwind. The lightnings lit up the world. I think we think about this as a super localized event somewhere around Egypt and Israel, right? But this is an earth-shattering event. Your lightnings lit up the world. The earth trembled and shook. Your way was in the sea, and your paths in the mighty waters, and your footprints may not be known. You led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. God's presence, his power, his authority was with his people. And it says that even though his footsteps weren't seen, that he was leading the Israelites through that. You jump to the miracle on the Sea of Galilee. His power and his presence is manifested there. And now he's just hammering in this lesson one more time for his disciples as he's about to leave. All authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. What I think is particularly interesting, when we have that storm in front of us, when we have that fear, and then Jesus says, I'm going to put my sandals on that place of your fear. And then Peter looks out at Jesus and says, can I come out? And he says, come. There's an invitation there. And Jesus creates this path from where we are at to him to walk through that fear, to walk through that storm, and for us to be with him. He actually uses some of the pain and some of the trials, some of the tribulations and the storms in our life to actually draw us closer to him. And so he says to the disciples, parting words, guys, I'm going. But I've been given authority, and now I give that to you. And here's what I want you to do. It doesn't matter what the middle says. If he says, all authority has been given to me, and I'm with you always, he could say, ride a bike to Hawaii, and you can do it. So my question for us is, where does that hit you today? Living in light of the resurrection and this place here on earth and the storms that we encounter, and it's not a if, it's a when. When we encounter those things, how do we move through those? He says, disciples, I want you to go out. And you look at what happens to the 11 as they live out their lives, and it wasn't like, and they lived happily ever after as they shared Jesus with their neighbors and their friends, right? It ended pretty gruesomely and brutally for all of them as they went out. And so that's the call for us as we live a life that's dependent on Jesus. I have some friends up at Hume Lake. I get to speak there every once in a while, and one of them was telling me about this awesome day that he had planned for his kids. Now, if you've been at Hume, it's a good 6 hours from here, but if you live at Hume, you're like 45 minutes from civilization. You are boxed in, and you start to get like island fever in the middle of the mountains, and your only hope of getting out is Fresno. It's not great, but they're like, I just got to go to Fresno. I need some like real coffee and like people, right? And so one of my friends out there, he was talking about this great day that he had planned for his kids. He wanted to take them to Disneyland. And so he gets them up really early in the morning. He says, guys, let's go. We're going to go do something absolutely amazing. This is going to be like the best day of your lives. And the kids are all, what? Tell us what it is. He's all, no, I don't want to tell you what it is. I just want you to trust me. This is going to be really awesome. And they're all, are we going to McDonald's? And he's all, no. It's better than McDonald's. It's going to be so great. You're going to, like, here's McDonald's, and this is what we're doing. It's just, Daddy, we want to go to McDonald's. No. Trust me, guys. Like, McDonald's is great. We love McDonald's, but this is going to be that much better. Daddy, we want to go to McDonald's. No. Yes, Daddy, we want to go. And they start rioting. They start rioting. We want to go. And they just throw a fit. I've been there with my kids. Like, I want to bless them. And they settle for so much less. I said, what'd you do? Well, in the end, we packed up the car. We went to Fresno. And we went to McDonald's. They ate their Happy Meals. They played in the play place. And then we went back to Hume. I said, did you ever tell them that Disneyland was available to them? He said, it would have broken their hearts. I think as we look at where our lives are at and what Jesus has planned for us in the scope of the kingdom, man, we are, C.S. Lewis says, we're far too easily pleased. That we are these half-hearted creatures, that we go about and we settle for drink and sex and food, and really, like, God has so much more planned for us. And we hit a storm where, I'm just going to go to McDonald's. When he's offering us the kingdom, when he's offering us this ability, this promise to live life fully. So don't lose sight. Don't lose sight of that, because our God has some incredible things in store for those of us who trust and for those of us who believe. So let's live out in the resurrection story this idea, and this is something that we teach our kids at Calvary, is that God is over it all. God sees the beginning to the end, and all of these characters throughout the Word of God, these are just characters that God has set up, but it's not about the Peters, and it's not about the King Davids, and it's not about the Adams and Eves. It's about him all the way through. And the great part is that we've been put on the timeline. We're a little bit further over here. But we've been put on the timeline, and our purpose and our role in this life is to glorify him. So may our hearts be open. May your eyes be open to what resurrection living looks like, that he's calling us to.